Let me talk to you about the trans movement. So it's been 10 short days since the Supreme Court ruled that a woman was just a woman, nothing else. And since then, we've seen hysteria, self-pity, catastrophising from trans women who believe the world is coming to an end. This tiny little group of people, we are told, who seem to dominate the airways, although all they want to do is live their life peacefully, if only. But what we've really seen is the misogyny and the hatred of women that underpins this trans movement. These narcissistic men who detest women, and they really do. And in that age-old fashion of misogyny, they want to silence women. They want to curtail their movement, control them, limit their liberty, and take away their hard-won rights. They don't feel any empathy for us. They don't feel empathy for women. They don't understand us because they hate women. They don't want to hear women's voices, only their own. And just look at the posters from these trans protests, which went on last week. They've gone on in 20 towns around the country today. They're threatening death, violence, and slinging vulgar insults at women. No decent man or woman would direct such vile vitriol at a woman for merely wanting to be safe in her own space amongst her own sex group. Remember, all of the violence that happens against women, almost all of it, is committed by men. Not all men are violent to women, most of them aren't. But we just don't know which ones are. So we want our own space and we don't want men in it. So my question is this: when is society, when are the government, when are the police going to stop allowing these threats and incitement to violence against women that are in plain sight?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Will, you're quite an anti, like, the extreme trans activist groups. Do you think that they have a point to say that, you know, there's not spaces for them and therefore they're being discriminated against, or is this just an attack on women?
It's an attack on women, is the short answer. And then specifically on the free speech issues, look, I, as you know, have a very, very high bar for what should constitute a speech crime. The thing that annoys people is when they see those types of placards, when they hear the stupid band at Coachella and they realise that there are people in jail who have done precisely the same thing, where there was no link to clear incitement of violence, and they get away with it because they can be tied to a political ideology which is aligned with the establishment class. That is what is so frustrating about this.
Matthew, so, you know, I mean, there's obviously, we saw some of those placards. Keir Starmer didn't make any comments about them and say, you know, I mean, he was, you know, you'd expect him almost to say, like, we don't appreciate this kind of violence. And I think, you know, given people like Rosie Duffield had threats to them made before because she's, you know, is gender critical of the trans movement. Does the Prime Minister have to come out a bit stronger on this?
You have to ask.
Well, what's your opinion?
I mean,
what's your opinion?
My view is that quite possibly he should have come out and said that there should be no threats towards women, because of course there shouldn't be. Any threat, whether a death threat or any form of threat towards a woman by someone who allies themselves or aligns themselves with the so-called trans movement, obviously should be condemned out of hand. The issue here is that there is hatred and indeed misogyny, as I said earlier, on both sides of this so-called debate.
Can you give us examples of that?
I've seen
Can you tell me
horrible transphobia, old-fashioned transphobia,
like
calling people who have transitioned. I'm not saying that they've.
But how's that misogyny?
Let me just make the point. I'll come to the misogyny. I'm talking about the hatred first. We're trying to answer a question first. Horrible hatred to trans people that 5 years ago would have been dismissed as old-school transphobia. Calling people who've transitioned, who've gone through that painful, difficult, vulnerable process, I imagine, a man. Yes, of course, you can't change your biology, but you don't single out people with viciousness. As for the misogyny, just quickly to answer your point on the misogyny, a lot of the people who support women's rights, by the way, I am one person who supports women's rights. I quite understand why many women are fiercely defensive of those rights. A lot of women, by the way, don't see this debate as a big issue for them, but lots do, and I respect and understand that. But a lot of the men who support that movement absolutely would be the first people to make a sexist or misogynist comment in another context. They use this because they want to get at minorities.
Yeah, go on, then I'll bring
OK, just put those aside, because we know that men can be misogynistic. That's not what's at debate here. I think to compare calling a man who is a man with saying that we should kill someone.
I'm not comparing
You
it.
did. You said there's been violence on both
No,
sides.
I'm
I
not
asked you for an
comparing that. I
example.
really am not.
I asked you
A
for an
death threat is
example.
in a different category. If you issue a death threat against J.K. Rowling or anyone else, any of the other prominent women in this debate, you should go to prison. Let's be completely clear about that. I'm now making a new start to a new sentence. If you call someone who has transitioned, who's gone through that process, if you call them a man, that is old-school transphobia, and we should call it out.
I want to bring Emma in.
Look, I think there's an irony and a real strategic failure in somebody who wants to enter a woman's space holding up a sign that says the only good turf is a dead turf. But this, there are trans people like Debbie Hayton, for example, who have welcomed this judgment because they know that they are not biological women, and the only way to protect the rights of biological women is for that to be the law. For women to be a biological category, trans people are trans people, whatever, but this is about protecting women's rights. And I think that any trans person that has an issue with that and would go out in the streets and protest against women securing their rights is not somebody that I would particularly want to be in a woman's space.
Where should a trans man go to the loo?
Sorry, guys. I have to move the conversation.
Really?
I'm really sorry. I have to move the conversation on because we have some breaking news coming for you very shortly. Up next, a shocking attack has taken place in Leeds, leaving 3 people injured. Our home and security editor will join us for the latest on this developing story. Please stay tuned. You'll be the Saturday 5 Live on GB News.